The FBI file was 900 pages long. 40 years of surveillance, hundreds of agents, millions of taxpayer dollars. And when Charlie Chaplin finally saw what they had written about him, he did something that nobody expected. He laughed, not a nervous laugh, not a bitter laugh, a genuine from-the-belly laugh that echoed off the walls of his Swiss mansion. Because after 4 decades of being hunted by the most powerful law enforcement agency in the world, the greatest comedian who ever lived had just discovered the punchline. But to understand why J. Edgar Hoover spent his entire career trying to destroy a man who made people laugh, you need to understand America in 1922. And you need to understand the man who believed that comedy was the most dangerous weapon in the world. The trouble started on a Tuesday afternoon in Washington, D.C. J. Edgar Hoover sat behind his mahogany desk, his bulldog face betraying no emotion. He was 27 years old, newly appointed as the head of the Bureau of Investigation, and he was building an empire. His filing cabinets were already filled with secrets, politicians, celebrities, anyone who might one day be useful or dangerous. On this particular Tuesday, his assistant placed a newspaper clipping on his desk. The headline read, "Charlie Chaplin calls for aid to starving children." Hoover picked up the clipping and read it slowly. Chaplin had given a speech in New York, calling on wealthy Americans to help feed hungry families during the economic downturn. He had donated $1,000 of his own money. He had said that no child should go to bed hungry in the richest country on earth. To most people, it was a charitable gesture. To J. Edgar Hoover, it was something else entirely. He reached for a blank folder and wrote 2 words on the tab. Chaplin, Charles. Then he began to write. 3,000 miles away, Charlie Chaplin had no idea that his life had just changed forever. He was in his studio on La Brea Avenue editing his latest film, completely unaware that the most paranoid man in America had just made him a target. Sidney Chaplin, Charlie's older brother and business manager, noticed something strange a few weeks later. The same black sedan had been parked outside the studio for 3 days straight. 2 men in dark suits sat inside watching. Sidney walked into Charlie's office, his face troubled. "Charlie, I think we're being followed." Charlie looked up from his editing table. "Followed? By whom?" "I don't know. Government, maybe. There's a car outside. Been there for days." Charlie shrugged and went back to his work. "Let them watch. I'm just making movies, Sidney. What could they possibly find?" But Sidney wasn't convinced. He had heard rumors about Hoover's new bureau, about the files they kept on anyone who spoke out against the government. "Charlie, maybe you should be more careful about what you say in public. That speech about the children, what about it? Some people are saying it. Sounded political." Charlie put down his scissors and looked at his brother. "Sidney, I said that hungry children should be fed. If that's political, then I suppose Jesus Christ was a politician too." Sidney sighed. He knew that look. Once Charlie made up his mind about something, there was no changing it. "Just be careful, brother. These are dangerous times." Charlie smiled. "I've survived the workhouse, Sidney. I've survived poverty, hunger, and a mother who went mad. I think I can survive a few men in suits." But Charlie Chaplin had no idea what he was up against. Over the next decade, Hoover's obsession with Chaplin grew into something that bordered on madness. He assigned agents to follow Chaplin everywhere, to restaurants, to parties, to film sets. They photographed everyone who entered his studio. They recorded his phone calls. They interviewed his servants, his drivers, his gardeners. The file grew thicker every month. In 1927, Hoover received a report that made his eyes light up. Chaplin was divorcing his second wife, Lita Gray, and the proceedings were messy. There were accusations of infidelity, of improper behavior, of moral failings. Hoover added every sordid detail to his file, not because Chaplin had broken any laws, but because the information might be useful someday. "We've got him now," Hoover told his assistant. "No man survives this kind of scandal." But Chaplin did survive. His films continued to break records. His fame continued to grow, and Hoover's frustration continued to build. In 1931, something happened that pushed Hoover over the edge. Charlie Chaplin went on a world tour to promote his new film, City Lights. In London, he met Winston Churchill. In Germany, he met Albert Einstein. And in every country he visited, he spoke about peace, about human dignity, about the need for nations to work together. When Chaplin returned to America, A reporter asked him what he thought about the growing political tensions in Europe. Chaplin's answer was simple: "I am not a nationalist. I am a citizen of the world." That quote appeared in newspapers across the country, and in Washington, D.C., J. Edgar Hoover circled it in red ink and wrote in the margin, "Subversive." The surveillance intensified. Hoover assigned a dedicated team to monitor Chaplin's every move. They compiled lists of his friends, his associates, anyone who might share his dangerous ideas. They looked for evidence of communist connections, of anti-American activities, of anything that could be used to destroy him. They found nothing. But Hoover didn't give up. He never gave up. In 1940, Chaplin released The Great Dictator, a film that openly mocked Adolf Hitler. It was a massive commercial success, and audiences around the world cheered as the little tramp made a fool of the most dangerous man on earth. But in Washington, Hoover saw something different. He saw a filmmaker who was trying to influence American foreign policy. He saw a man who was telling the American people what to think. He added another 100 pages to the file. And then, in 1942, Chaplin made his biggest mistake. America had entered World War II, and the Soviet Union was now an ally against Nazi Germany. At a rally in San Francisco, Chaplin gave a speech calling for a second front in Europe to relieve pressure on the Russian army. "Comrades," he began, using a word that was common among Allied supporters at the time. That single word would haunt him for the rest of his life. Hoover now had what he needed. He labeled Chaplin a communist sympathizer. He shared information with friendly journalists. He whispered in the ears of politicians. The attacks began almost immediately. Newspaper columnists who had once praised Chaplin now questioned his loyalty. Politicians who had once posed for photos with him now called for investigations. The tide of public opinion, so carefully manipulated by Hoover's machine, began to turn. Sidney Chaplin watched it happen with growing horror. He came to his brother's house one evening carrying a stack of newspaper clippings. "Charlie, you have to do something. They're destroying you." Charlie looked at the headlines. Chaplin: "Communist? Is the little tramp a Red? Hollywood's most dangerous man." "What would you have me do, Sidney? Apologize for believing in peace? Apologize for wanting children to eat?" "I would have you survive." Sidney grabbed his brother's arm. "Hoover has destroyed bigger men than you. He destroyed Orson Welles. He destroyed Paul Robeson. Anyone who speaks out, he crushes them. Just give them what they want, Charlie. Make a statement. Say you love America. Say you hate communism. Make this go away." Charlie pulled his arm free. "I am not a communist, Sidney. I have never been a communist. But I will not grovel before bullies. I did not grovel in the workhouse when I was 7 years old, and I will not grovel now. This isn't the workhouse, Charlie. This is the United States government. And I am Charlie Chaplin." He said it quietly, but there was steel in his voice. "I have made the world laugh for 30 years. I will not let one small man with a filing cabinet take that away from me." Sidney left that night knowing that his brother had made his choice, and knowing that there would be consequences. The final confrontation came in 1952. Charlie Chaplin had just finished his new film, Limelight, a bittersweet story about an aging comedian. He and his wife Una decided to attend the London premiere, traveling by ship across the Atlantic. They were 2 days into the voyage when the telegram arrived. The ship's captain delivered it personally, his face grave. Chaplin took the envelope, opened it, and read the words that would change his life forever. The Attorney General of the United States had revoked his re-entry permit. If Charlie Chaplin stepped off the ship and onto British soil, he would never be allowed to return to America. Una found him on the deck an hour later, staring at the ocean. The telegram was crumpled in his hand. "Charlie, what is it? What's happened?" He handed her the paper without a word. She read it. Her face went pale. "They can't do this," she whispered. "They can't just—" "They can," he said quietly. And they did. For a long moment, neither spoke. The ship cut through the gray Atlantic waters, carrying them further from the country that had made Chaplin famous, the country he had called home for 40 years. Finally, Una took his hand. "What do you want to do?" Chaplin looked at her. This woman who had given up everything for him, who had defied her famous father, who had borne his children and stood by his side through scandal after scandal. "I want to go home," he said. "But Charlie, they won't let you." "Home isn't America, Una." He squeezed her hand. Home is where you are. Home is where our children are. Home is wherever we can live in peace. Una's eyes filled with tears. Then we'll find a new home, together. When the ship docked in London, a mob of reporters was waiting. Mr. Chaplin, Mr. Chaplin, will you fight the deportation order? Mr. Chaplin, do you have any comment on the Attorney General's decision? Mr. Chaplin, are you a communist? Charlie Chaplin stopped walking. He turned to face the cameras, and for a moment his face was expressionless. Then slowly, he smiled. I have no further use for America, he said, his voice calm and clear. I wouldn't go back if Jesus Christ was president. The flashbulbs exploded. The reporters shouted more questions, but Charlie Chaplin just took his wife's arm and walked away. He never looked back. The Chaplins settled in Switzerland, in a beautiful mansion overlooking Lake Geneva. Una gave birth to 4 more children there. Charlie wrote his autobiography. He composed music. He watched his older children grow and his younger children learn to walk. And he never set foot in America again. But the story wasn't over. In 1972, 20 years after his exile, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences did something unprecedented. They invited Charlie Chaplin back to America to receive an honorary Oscar. Chaplin was 83 years old now, frail and uncertain. He wasn't sure if he would even be allowed entry. The FBI file was still active. Hoover had died just months earlier, but his legacy of paranoia lived on. Una held his hand on the flight to Los Angeles. Are you scared? Chaplin smiled. A little, but not of them. I'm scared they'll remember me as the little tramp, and I'll walk on stage and trip over my own feet. She laughed. That would be perfect, actually. On the night of the ceremony, Charlie Chaplin walked onto the stage of the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion. The audience and thousands of Hollywood's finest rose to their feet, and they kept standing. The applause thundered through the hall. 10 seconds, 30 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes. People were crying. People were cheering. The conductor tried to start the orchestra, but the applause drowned out the music. 5 minutes, 8 minutes, 10 minutes. Charlie Chaplin stood at the podium, tears streaming down his face. He tried to speak, but the applause wouldn't stop. 12 minutes. It was the longest standing ovation in Oscar history. It remains the longest standing ovation to this day. When the applause finally faded, Chaplin leaned into the microphone. His voice was barely a whisper. Thank you. This is so sweet. Thank you. 3 words. After everything they had done to him. After 40 years of surveillance. After exile. After trying to destroy his legacy. 3 words. It was the most Chaplin thing he could have done. After the ceremony, a reporter asked him if he had forgiven America for what they did to him. Chaplin thought for a moment. Then he smiled that familiar smile, the one that had made millions of people laugh. Forgiveness is not the issue, he said. The issue is that they wasted 40 years and millions of dollars investigating a man whose only crime was making people think, and in the end they couldn't find a single thing to charge me with. He paused. If you want to know the truth, I feel sorry for them. They spent their whole lives being afraid, and I spent my whole life making people happy. The FBI file on Charlie Chaplin was finally closed in 1978, a year after his death. It was 900 pages long, 40 years of surveillance, thousands of man-hours, countless resources, and they never found a single piece of evidence that Charlie Chaplin had ever broken any law. Today, that file is publicly available. Anyone can read it. And you know what's remarkable? It reads like a comedy. Page after page of agents reporting on dinner parties and film shoots and speeches about hungry children. The most powerful law enforcement agency in the world, brought to its knees by a man with a funny walk and a little mustache. Charlie Chaplin died on Christmas Day, 1977, in his home in Switzerland. He was 88 years old. His wife Una was by his side. His children were nearby. The world mourned. Las Vegas dimmed its lights. Hollywood paused to remember. And somewhere in a government archive, 1,300 pages of evidence sat in a folder, proving absolutely nothing except that one small man with a filing cabinet had wasted his entire life being afraid of a comedian. In the end, Charlie Chaplin had the last laugh. Because the hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people, and so long as men die, liberty will never perish. He said those words in 1940. They're still true today. And that FBI file? It's still sitting in an archive somewhere, 1,900 pages of fear and paranoia and wasted effort. Meanwhile, Charlie Chaplin's films are still being watched. The Little Tramp is still making people laugh, and the world is still learning the lesson that J. Edgar Hoover never understood. You can't destroy a man who makes people think. You can only make him more powerful.